Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So, this is the fourth session, essentially the final session of this program. So, we're going to be getting right into it. So, I want to talk about leadership assessments. And most of the leadership assessments here, actually, all three of them, are self report leadership assessments. They'll test different aspects of your own leadership skills. The one that I'm going to be talking about the most is the leadership self-efficacy scale. Um, so we're going to be getting into that one. Now, the importance of these assessments, why they're important. Well, high performers may not always be great leaders. What this means is that you may see yourself as someone who can get everything done, but that doesn't always mean that you also have leadership traits. Same thing with mitigating bias, right? You might feel like you have certain traits when it comes to leadership, but you may take one of these assessments and you find out that your strengths really lie somewhere else. And also improving self-awareness, right? This is the act of reflection required by self-reports, which force leaders to like pause, self-evaluate, and actively identify their own perceived strengths and actual structural limitations of their own leadership traits. Other leadership traits include the general self-efficacy and also motivation to lead. And those are also really good assessments. You can look them up and they're fairly easy to find. Now, we're going to be talking about the leadership self-efficacy scale. And this scale has essentially six different dimensions slash categories. The first one is starting and leading change processes in groups. The second one is choosing effective followers and delegating responsibilities. The third one is building and managing interpersonal relationships within a group. The fourth one is showing self-awareness and self-confidence. The fifth one is motivating people. And the sixth one is gaining consensus of group members. Now, how do you actually score this assessment? Well, you're going to see that every single category has few items. And on each of the items, you're going to basically be giving yourself a score from either a 1 to a 7. And to get the final score, if you want the global score, you can just add up all the items. But if you want to just focus on one dimension slash category, then you can add all the items from that one category and then divide it by 21. So, a higher overall score reflects a stronger belief in one's overall leadership capabilities. Obviously, these assessments are very subjective. Um, just because you see yourself as a certain type of leader does not mean that your employees and your followers are going to see you in the same light. So just take these with a grain of salt. But I think that if you have never done them before, this is a really good place to start to identify your own leadership traits and your own leadership characteristics. Now, when it comes to the leadership self-efficacy scale, this assessment was originally in Italian and it was converted to English. Um, there are versions that are just purely Italian, and even the English versions have some Italian in it. So, mind the grammatical um, errors of this assessment. Now, the first category is starting and leading change processes in groups, right? And then the first item is I'm able to set a new direction for a group if one currently taken doesn't seem correct to me. Now, I want to rate myself a 6 on this key item. I can usually change attitudes and behaviors of group members if they don't meet group objectives. I will rate myself a 5 on this key item. And then the last item for this dimension is I'm able to change things in a group even if they are not completely under my control. Now, there are obviously other categories, right? And if you want a global score, you're just going to add all the items up. I just really want to reiterate that. But if you want to just focus on strengthening this, then you're just going to add up these items and just divide it by 21. And you're going to get a coefficient, which is typically going to be from either a 0.60 to a 0.90. Um, so, yes, that's kind of how scoring works. We're going to be going through all other uh, dimensions as well. Now, when it comes to these self-report leadership assessments, I highly recommend that you complete this with me currently if you have never done it before. And if you have done it before, then I recommend that you at least wait some time, I would say from 6 months to a year, to see how your leadership traits and your leadership characteristics are developing and in what areas are they developing in. It kind of gives you a really good idea and also lets you self-reflect on your ability to lead. So the next domain or the next category slash dimension in the leadership self-efficacy scale is choosing effective followers and delegating responsibilities. And this dimension has 4 items. So go ahead, and I'm not going to read through all of them, but I want you to go through it and score it by yourself. The third dimension of the leadership self-efficacy scale is building and managing interpersonal relationships within the group. This only has 3 items, so score it between a score of 1 to 7, and we're going to move on to the next one. Now, the fourth dimension is showing self-awareness and self-confidence. This dimension has 5 items, so go on ahead, give it yourself a score of 1 to 7 for every single item. We're going to move on to the next one. All right, the fifth dimension is motivating people. Only has 3 items. I want you to read through them and give yourself a score between 1 to 7 for all 3 of them. And then last but not least, this is the sixth item for the leadership self-efficacy scale. And the last item is gaining consensus of group members. Only has 3 items. Rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 7 for the 3 items. So once you're done with the assessment, I want you to add up all the numbers from all 21 items, and you're going to get a nice big global score. Now, if you were just focusing on one dimension, and for me, it was starting and leading change processes in groups. I added up all the items and I divided it by 21, and 0.75 was my coefficient that I need to monitor over time. So this is something that I want to improve on is to, leading change in a group. So I'm going to be doing this assessment every 6 months to a year to see if this coefficient has increased. Um, Now, the importance of self-awareness, right? Because these assessments uh, are really for self-awareness. And this is important because you cannot lead others if you do not understand yourself. And self-report assessments are probably the most efficient, cost-effective way to measure your your inner drive and your leadership capabilities, and also your confidence, core motivations, and to make sure that these are also aligning with your leadership responsibilities. Now, also your belief in your own capability will directly dictate your resilience as a leader. And as a leader, you will get tested at times where you're going to be outside of your comfort zone. And these types of assessments can really highlight, if you were put in a certain situation, how would you react? And these assessments are fairly low risks just because they're not getting shared with anybody, right? It's just for your own personal confirmation or self reflection. So the next leadership style that I want to get into is situational leadership style. And this is essentially, as a leader, you're matching your your efforts to the style slash the readiness of the employee. Now, if you lead a highly competent employee and you try to micromanage them, right, they will become demotivated. And then same thing, if you lead someone who is highly enthusiastic but is not very well trained, like a novice, um, with a hands-off delegating style, then they will fail. So success really lies in diagnosing competence and commitment first, and then matching your behavior to that diagnostic. Now, if someone who is, very new, but they're highly committed, you're going to be giving them, you're going to be utilizing directing communication style. So you're going to give clear step-by-step instructions. Do not assume that they know how to do it. Now, if someone has some competency but low commitment, now you're coaching, right? You're providing directions while actively explaining the why and offering praise to rebuild confidence. Um, then, if someone who is highly competent but has variable commitment, right? You're gonna encourage autonomy. Act as your, act as a sounding board essentially. Listen to their concerns, what is going on, and try to build their self-efficacy. And then someone who is highly competent and highly committed, you're going to be delegating. You're essentially going to get out of their way, give them ownership of the task, let them do the job that, they might be able to do almost better than you at times. So, very important situational leadership elements. Now, as you can see, there's no such thing as a low competence slash low commitment employee, right? There's some competence, low commitment. Um, and if you're falling into low competent and low commitment, then it's probably time to consider like a different career field. I'm not trying to say that as a negative thing, but I think it's important to find something that you want to really commit to. And if healthcare is not for you, then if you're going to be unhappy as a leader in the healthcare field, maybe try a different field that will fulfill you better and that you can commit more to. Now, it's also important to understand people's level of where they're at. And, sometimes you can be working with somebody who is, highly competent and highly committed. Um, and you feel like, you should just get out of the way. Now, if you're going to have them do a new task that they have never done before, then they could essentially, you know, go down to the level where they're low competent and but they'll still have high commitment. So it's important to not assume everybody's level when it comes to different job tasks. Situational leadership is very dynamic in nature. You will be working with individuals when sometimes you are just getting out of the way, and sometimes with the same individual on a different task, you will have to give very clear step-by-step instructions, right? And we should never assume that they should know how to do it just because they are, highly competent and highly committed on one aspect of their job task. And then same thing, pitfalls of like under leading. Sometimes we just feel like, as I mentioned before, someone we feel like who is very committed, highly competent in an aspect, we're just over delegating everything, right? And then sometimes we're over leading, and this is happening when you are like essentially treating somebody who is highly competent and highly committed with the task, and we're treating them like giving them clear directions and stuff. Well, they know how to do it. So I think building a relationship, learning to see how your coworkers are functioning and what they're good at, and you can really utilize this leadership style to maximize their strengths. And I think that through utilizing your team members' strengths, is probably like the best way to work as a leader. So very important to not assume and really focus on knowing what your team members are excellent at, and conversely, what they're not very good at. And then last but not least, this is kind of how the situational leadership model works, right? If they have high willingness, high ability, you're going to be just delegating. If they have low ability, low willingness, you're going to be directing. If they have high ability and low willingness, you're going to be supporting. And if they have um, high willingness and low ability, you're just going to be coaching. So this is essentially the situational leadership model. So switching gears. So next up, we're going to be talking about the five dysfunctions of a team. The five dysfunctions of a team outlines why even the most talented teams often struggle to collaborate. Um, Team failure is not often caused by a lack of individual talent or technical skill, but rather by five distinct interconnected like behavior pitfalls. And these dysfunctions form a pyramid, right? Where each level builds upon and exacerbates the one above it. So it's really important when you're looking at this pyramid. So the first dysfunction of the team is lack of trust. The second one, sorry, absent of trust. The second one is fear of conflict. The third one is lack of commitment. Fourth one is avoidance of accountability. And fifth one is inattention to results. Now, if you're struggling with results in your team and you're trying to fix, the results, but you also realize that there's also absence of trust in your team, this would take priority over fixing the results. So you have to start at the bottom and fix, the absence of trust within your team in order for you to finally fix the results, right? So it's a bottom to top approach, and that is the five dysfunctions of a team. And we're going to be getting more into them now. Now, absence of trust. Well, what does that mean? Well, team members are unwilling to be vulnerable with each other, right? They're holding grudges, they're dreading their interactions with each other. And the recommendations for the leaders include leading by example, admitting the mistakes that you yourself have made as a leader, and also sharing personal weakness. Um, it's okay to be vulnerable with your team members if you want to build trust with them. So having those hard conversations, really putting yourself out there, having conversations that are deep and meaningful. Alrighty, so the next one is fear of conflict. Now, there's a lack of passion, right? There's a lack of passion. This is characterized by team members just not being very passionate about what they're doing. There are no unfiltered conversations. They avoid the hard conversations. And there's almost like this artificial harmony, right? Like everyone is happy go lucky. And if you're struggling with a fear of conflict, dysfunction in your team, then the recommendations for the leader include the following. So call out the artificial argument, or call out the artificial agreements. If someone is just nodding their head entire time in a meeting, you really should ask them, what about this is that you like so much? um, and also force constructive criticism, and really try to get a conversation that is authentic out of your team members, because fear of conflict, if everyone is just wants to just get by and not do much, then it's going to disrupt the results, the accountability, everything else above this pyramid. So really important to address fear of conflict. Next one up is a lack of commitment. So now there's a lack of buy-in from your team members, right? They seek consensus, and they're often one or two team members are often second guessing decisions, and there almost isn't, employees feel like they're not stakeholders within this organization that they work in. Now, if you're struggling with lack of commitment, it's really important to um, for the leader, it's really important to force the team to stick to a course of action, right? You got to set the standard. Like, this is the way that we're going to be doing things, and this is the way how it's going to be done. Um, and also, when there's a lack of commitment, coaching, as we discussed earlier, um, is extremely important. If you're able to achieve that, then you're going to be able to get rid of that lack of commitment from your teams. Next one up is avoidance of accountability. Now, this is where everything is kind of just accepted, right? Like bad attitude is tolerated. If someone doesn't do too good on something, it's kind of just seen as a minor inconvenience, right? So poor performers are not rewarded, but they are tolerated. They're typically often settling for average. Um, Now, recommendations to leaders when it comes to of the one of the five functions of the team for avoidance of accountability. These include establishing clear standards, um, and then also publicly sharing your vision, right? Transformational leadership style. Um, really publicly sharing your vision to having all other team members to have them buy in into whatever you're planning to do. So avoidance of accountability is a major downfall of organizations. Most organizations and even relationships sometimes fail because we feel like somebody else should be doing it, and which is why we don't do it. So avoidance of accountability is very important. Every team member should feel like they're able to achieve and be able to do any task that they're assigned to. So very important avoidance of accountability and to instill accountability within your team members. Now, last but not least, of the five dysfunctions of a team is inattention to results. So this is where team member or team members are focusing on just their personal status. They're focusing on career goals rather than organizational goals. And something that's happening in this organization is that there's a repetition of the same mistakes that have already happened. The recommendations to leaders when it comes to organizations struggling with inattention to results is utilizing praise and monetary rewards to the collective team rather than individuals. Um, Individual promotions are almost going to come secondary unless there's organizational success and there's attention to results, right? And also learning from mistakes. So these are the five dysfunctions of a team. Now, next up, we're going to be going over the post test. So this is the conclusion of the entire program. Everybody did great. Um, Hopefully you learned a lot. And yeah, I was really happy to do this. Again, I want to thank you so much for your participation. I really enjoyed doing this program, and I learned a lot about leadership as well. I had to brush up on a lot of things that I thought I knew, but I really have, learned a lot in this program, and I hope that you were able to do the same. So we're going to be getting into the post test next. Again, there are only 10 questions. Um, do not forget to complete your annual leadership self-assessment. If there's something that I could leave you with, I think it's that. And seek out mentorship. I think it's probably the most valuable form of of attaining a leadership position or developing your own leadership skills. So always do the annual leadership self-assessment. There's three different ones that I pointed out. You can do either one of the three. Now we're going to be getting into the post test, and yeah. Now, question number one. Personal factors in the Kava model are represented by what? Rocks, driftwood, riverbed, or pebbles? Question number two. Which is the most researched leadership style in OT literature? Is it Servant leadership style, considerate leadership style, social learning, or is it sensory motor? Ethical dilemmas and moral distress stem from which of the following? Is it effective patient care, positive patient outcomes, praise from rehab director, or productivity pressures? Occupational deprivation, occupational marginalization, occupational alienation, and occupational imbalance are terms from which of the following? Prudence, occupational justice, beneficence, or conceptualization? What is the key difference between a servant leader and a considerate leader? So, A, persuasion, B, altruism, C, empathy, and D, growth/professional development of employees. Now, I know it says question number one, but this is question number six. Transformational leaders mainly focus on what? A, productivity, B, organizational efficiency, C, revenue, D, creating a shared vision. Question number 2, which of the following is not a domain from occupational adaptation model? Sensory motor, cognitive, riverbed, or psychosocial? Number technically 8. Considered leadership style leads to what? High employee satisfaction and retention, high employee resignations, team member ignoring personal conflicts, or D, increase interprofessional team member collaboration. Question number 9. George and few other employees continue to hide their weaknesses, hold grudges, dread meetings, and just focus on protecting their personal reputation Which of the 5 dysfunctions of the team does this represent? Fear of conflict, absence of trust, lack of commitment, or inattention to results? Question number 10. What is the most evidence-based, effective, and efficient way of developing leadership? A, research, B, talking to your rehab director, C, theories, and D, mentorship. So let's go over the answers. So personal factors in the Kava model are represented by what? Well, they're represented by the driftwood, right? Those are your personal factors that you can utilize to move that driftwood so that you can get greater successes in whatever you want to achieve in your life. What is the most researched leadership style in OT literature? Well, that's going to be the Servant leadership style. Transformational is also very well researched, which is why I didn't put that in the options. Ethical dilemmas and moral distress stem from which of the following? Well, it's going to be productivity pressures. Occupational deprivation, occupational marginalization, occupational alienation, and occupational imbalances are terms from which of the following? These are all about occupational justice, right? Because occupational justice is like you're either inhibiting their ability to participate in meaningful occupation, and everyone has the right to participate in an occupation of meaning. What is the key difference between servant leaders and considered leaders? Well, it's A, and this is kind of a harder question because considerate leaders, they are not the types to pursue, right? The servant leaders, yes, they're there to serve, but if they see like a right path ahead, they will try to pursue you to see that this is the better way for organizations to go forward. Considerate leadership styles, when it comes to that, they don't really pursue. They just are there to help you out as much as they could. Transformational leaders mainly focus on what? Well, they are the ones that are creating a shared vision, and they are getting their team members to buy into that shared vision, which leads to organizational success. Which of the following is not a domain from occupational adaptation? And that is the riverbed, right? Because that is a concept of the Kava model. Considered leadership style leads to what? Well, it leads to high employee satisfaction and retention because they're very considerate of their employees. Um, for this question, the D, increase interprofessional team member collaboration, yes, it happens, but um, just the main aspect of like the hallmark of considered leadership is really high retention rates and high employee satisfaction. George and few other employees continue to hide their weaknesses, hold grudges, dread meetings, and just focus on protecting their personal reputation. Which of the 5 dysfunctions of the team does this represent? Um, right, they don't really trust each other. So again, absence of trust. Um, what is the most evidence-based, effective, and efficient way of developing leadership? And that is mentorship. So mentorship is so important, and I highly, highly urge that you go out and find yourself a mentor that you can communicate freely with, that you can, share ideas with, that you can learn from. So this has been my program for leadership development in novice occupational therapist. I know it's not all inclusive, but I believe the information in here is going to help a novice occupational therapist seeking out a leadership role. And furthermore, I think that it is a great avenue for even experienced occupational therapists to really brushing up their leadership, um, their leadership knowledge and the traits and the different theories and models that exist within occupational therapy, and also the healthcare industry as a whole, and the leadership literature that exists on it. So it has been great. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye bye.